Some of the best areas in South Africa for trout fishing are the Drakensberg, KwaZulu-Natal Midlands, Cedarburg and the Western Cape. Delstrom is in the Mpumalanga province. The first trout to be released into South African waters were imported from Loch Leven in Scotland at the start of the 19th century. Today, it's difficult to imagine that trout is not actually an indigenous fish species, but alien to our rivers and dams. Currently, huge confusion exists regarding the implications of the proposed listing of brown trout and rainbow trout as invasive species in terms of the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act. Well, joining us now from our parliamentary studios to shed a little bit more light on this issue is Dr. Guy Preston. He is the Deputy Director General of Environmental Programs from the Department of Environmental Affairs. Doctor, thank you very much for talking to us and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Leanne.
Let's first begin with the basics. Alien invasive species, what does it mean to us?
An alien species is a species that's been introduced into an area from a different area in which it evolved. And those that are invasive are ones that can outcompete the indigenous species. So the lists that we have and the regulations that we are doing are addressing those species that can cause harm to biodiversity through invading and outcompeting indigenous species.
Yeah. So they actually can cause harm, and now we're referring to the two trout species that I did speak about, which originally, as I mentioned, come from Scotland.
Well, no, the brown trout comes from northern Europe and Asia, and the rainbow trout comes from the northern parts of the USA.
Okay.
Both were introduced into South Africa, as you say, more than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And certainly have established widely in the areas that are suitable for their distribution. And they have outcompeted indigenous species, preying on fishes, on amphibians, invertebrates, and other indigenous species in the areas in which they occur.
So what are the implications of listing trout as an invasive species?
You know, in terms of the practices that we have right now, virtually nothing. So where trout is legally in waters, because they are already permitted, we are not going to be able to make much of a difference to that anyway, because once a fish is established into a system, it's extremely difficult to get them out of the system. So our big concern is not to have further areas being invaded by the species. But the implications for fly fishers, fishermen and fisherwomen, is virtually zero. You can continue to fish. You do not need a permit now to fish. You can catch and release wherever you catch the fish. So there's no impact that is likely to happen as a result of that for fly fishers. For the fish trade industry, the aquaculture industry, we certainly support that, because once again, in systems in which the fish occur, we're not going to get them out of those systems, and we should exploit their presence in the systems to full effect. So although they will require a permit, they are not going to be negatively affected by the regulations either. And in fact, we are relaxing the regulations in some ways, so we are enabling in systems in which the trout already occur, enabling people to introduce them into dams without a permit as well.
Yeah.
The big thing that we're concerned about is that we do not want the trout being introduced into other areas in which they do not occur. But I think likewise, Leanne, these regulations are covering a spectrum of species, bass, carp and other fishes. There's 17 different fish species on the list. And the trout waters, so-called, are not ones where you'd want predators that are going to eat trout getting into those areas too. So
yeah.
in actual effect, we are protecting the trout areas with the legislation that we are bringing through.
What about job losses? Because I think at the root of all of those people are very concerned about that.
There'll be no job losses from this. There's no impact on aquaculture from because they are already licensed legal activities. It's something we're working together with the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. In terms of fly fishing, as I've said, there is going to be no effective impact on the individuals for legal fly fishing where it's occurring. If people were to be introducing them into areas where they do not occur, there'll certainly be consequences if people are caught.
Some people, however, are criticising the department and basically saying that, that the department is trying to destroy the trout industry and eradicate trout altogether by not being allowed to introduce them. Again, a response to this?
I think the notion of eradicating trout is an absurdity. As I've said, it's going to be virtually impossible to get not just trout, bass, carp, other fish species that have invaded areas out of those areas. What we can do is try to protect the areas where they have not invaded. But to talk of eradicating trout, in other words, getting rid of them in our country, is ludicrous. It's not something we're going to try to do. It's not something that we want to do. In terms of the industry, I think that's also a crazy idea that the government would want to close down a billion rand industry. We want to encourage the trout industry to exist in the areas in which it does exist. It's now irreversible in most of the areas in which they occur, and therefore we should exploit them fully, just as we do with plantations of invasive alien plants. We are not saying that those things should be closed down either. They're important aspects and an important contribution to our country and economy. Okay. What we need to do is get a balance between where these things occur and outside of those areas where we can protect our biodiversity and ecological functioning of systems.
All right, let's leave it there for this morning. Thank you for talking to us and giving us a little bit more information about the story. Dr. Guy Preston from the Department of Environmental Affairs joining us from our parliamentary studios this morning. Thank you very much.